Someone said something this morning which I thought was quite interesting. You could be led to believe right now that Labour won the election, Andrew, and the Tories lost, the way it's all spinning out. So it's like Tories in disarray, Theresa May fighting for her job. Meanwhile, the guy that lost, Corbyn, is the new messiah, chanting in the stadiums. It's a weird political environment, isn't it?
It is. I don't think we're going to see many Tory activists in that conference hall shouting, cheering, oh, Theresa May, like they did, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, somehow. I did see her at a reception last night, and she was a bit livelier, she was a bit more animated, but I thought she was pretty hopeless on the Andrew Marr show yesterday, and that sort of set the tone for the conference. Two announcements that have been not particularly well received, really, fiddling around the margins with student debt, student loans, and this thing to do with Help to Buy. I just don't think I just think they're not the answers. And she's moved on to Corbyn's agenda, but in my view, not with the right answers.
Yeah, Kevin, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Yesterday, she was asked directly, and Boris Johnson's come out with another, 4-point plan. These are my red lines, as if he's somehow running the show, right? And there's the Prime Minister, who is supposed to be running the show, who is asked point blank numerous times about what she thinks of Boris Johnson. Then, is anyone unsackable? Surely the simple answer to is anyone unsackable is no. Of course they're not. You show leadership and authority. Why could she not just say, no, of course everyone's sackable, including me?
Yeah, look, she's like a frightened mouse being caught by a cat and worried about those Johnson claws coming out and getting her. You're quite right. She should have said, we're all sackable. Nobody is unsackable. I like what Boris Johnson says. He's very good as a foreign secretary. She'd have to lie about that because, of course, he is completely useless. But nevertheless, that's what you normally say as a leader. And she is utterly, utterly out of her depth. This place is like a morgue. I've seen more life in a morgue than you get here at the Tory conference. She is terrified of the foreign secretary. The rest of the cabinet are now saying, why don't you shut him up? You've got to do something about this. And you just see her power draining away. You say that she was a bit lively last night. Look, she's got political rigor mortis. That is the truth. The dead woman walking, zombie government, living dead. It is all true here.
Andrew, there was even a documentary last night on Channel 4 about Boris Johnson. In it, he made sort of one of his characteristic diplomatic gaffes, where he started to recite a Rudyard Kipling poem in a Myanmar location, and the ambassador had to just say, perhaps stop right there before you offend anybody. However, the more he bounces back, the more resilient he appears. Does he get just more and more popular?
I'll tell you what I thought. I thought some weeks ago that it was all over for Boris Johnson, that people thought he was... he'd reached his high point, he'd reached his watershed. I'm no longer so sure, because even though Maguire will do everything he can to mock him and say he's an idiot and all the rest of it, but Boris Johnson's a very clever man, he's a very popular man, and he's got something that Corbyn has got, and I have to acknowledge that Corbyn has got something. He's got appeal to voters. Boris still has great appeal to voters. People see him as a potential winner. He defied gravity in London and won it twice as mayor. And he knows that Theresa May is not going to lead the Tories into the next election. And he's reminding people that he's there and that he's got huge voter appeal. And I tell you this, the Corbynistas will be fearful of Boris Johnson.
Well, they may or may not. I mean, Kevin...
Yeah,
but Kevin, the point is, I mean, I'm not sure they would, actually. I think they'd quite fancy a sort of old-school socialist campaign against tough Boris. But let me just read out the four red lines that Boris came out with, Kevin, in an article for The Sun on Saturday. I just want you to... We'll go through these. I want to know, really, how these differ, because he says this is government policy, but it's not, is it? So let's go through this. Any transition period after Britain leaves the EU should not last a second more than 2 years. Now, that is different language to the one Theresa May used, right? Yeah. Just on that first point.
No, absolutely, because she talks about 2 years... No, you're absolutely right, Piers. She talks about a 2-year transition period. But she knows when you get into that, you might have to go to 2.5, you might have to go to 3. You may need some flexibility in the negotiations. If all of a sudden you have big companies saying we can't comply, we would have serious problems. She wants that flexibility. He wants to close her off because he wants to make himself the great guardian of Brexit.
Right, so second point, UK must refuse to accept new EU rules during that period.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen. She knows that we will remain in the single market and the customs union. You will have to abide by the rules on the customs union and the single market.
OK, third one, no payments for access to the single market after the end of the transition period.
Yeah, well, she might have to do that, and she knows she wouldn't want to do that. She wouldn't want to have to spend more money than necessary, but she might have to do that if it's how you safeguard jobs. For instance, we know Nissan, the big car company, the Japanese-owned, or it's actually French-Japanese-owned in the northeast of England, has a secret letter, has a secret deal. We don't know what that is, but if it's access to a market and you have to pay for it, she'd have to pay for it. She's made that commitment.
Okay.